Hey guys, welcome to the video blog number 2. This one will be called Finished Work Eschatology, and we're going to specifically talk about today, we'll subtitle it the parable of the husbandman or the wicked vine dressers. It depends on what kind of Bible you're using. I'm coming to you from my office this week. Forgive me if there's a little whirly sound overhead. I don't know how it's going to come through on audio. I do have an overhead fan on to give me a little bit of cool relief. I want to start by saying how amazed that I was last week at the response to our first blog. It kind of jumped all over the world, and people responded, and 99% of it pretty favorable. I just was stunned at how many people are just hungry for the topic of eschatology in any way they can get it. And so there's just a couple of things I want to say as I get started this week, and I am going to try to be true to my time, 15-20 minutes or so, just to make it easy for everyone. And one of the first things I say is that I'm going to take it very slowly, okay? I got more than one person that had commented over the last week or emailed us or what have you that said, I'm so thankful you're doing this because you have a reputation of taking scriptures very slowly and within context. You're not trying to rush ahead of yourself. And so I take that as a great compliment, a great honor, and that's how we're going to study this. So we're not jumping way ahead of ourselves. I moved slow, and the reason for that is because I think context is everything. I think we've hurt ourselves in Bible study because we've jumped so far outside of context way too often. And that's the reason why I'm not answering all of the questions that came in. In fact, almost all of the questions were way out ahead of where I want to be at this point. There was one, and I'll cover that in a moment, that I think was relevant, at least one that we're going to use. But a lot of questions dealt with stuff like the rapture. It dealt with the resurrection. It dealt with I even got blood moons and things of that nature. So I think some of that's kind of typical with what we're seeing going on in Christian circles and what's coming out of pulpits and books. But I don't want to go down those roads before we need to. We'll take our time getting there. Perhaps I move so slow, some people just give up. They want answers quickly. But I'm not just about showing you the house, the finished product, handing you the keys. I'm about showing you the property, how the blueprints are laid out, laying the foundation, putting up the flooring, then the walls, the whole process. And to do that, we have to take our time. And one other thing, I prayed a lot about how to handle situations, whether it be this subject or other subjects, and God has put us in a position where we have a platform and we reach a lot of people, and I don't know how we got here, especially considering that by and large I'm a pretty easily wounded soul. I don't like confrontation and fights. I avoid social media pretty much because I don't like a format where people can attack anonymously, and I think that the internet has made lions out of cowards a lot of times. So you don't see me in there sparring. And being an easily wounded soul, I've asked the Lord many times, why did you give us any gift at all to do this? Because a lot of people, you got a lot more aggressive people. And honestly, have felt the Lord say to me, because aggressive people, the people that are not easily wounded are usually verbally aggressive. And topics like this need kid gloves. They don't need verbal abuse. And so when we're dealing with something like eschatology, which is really a polarizing subject for a lot of Christians, we're dealing with something that takes soft hand a little bit. And those of us that are easily wounded typically won't fire at you. We'll just lay out the case. You may not agree with it. I don't have all the answers. I don't even claim to be close to it. I read a lot of stuff. I hear a lot of people say things. I see people make assumptions about me and go, he must believe this. And I think, I don't believe that. And I see other things and people will say, and I'll be totally on board with, but I let that go. I'm still in the learning curve. I'm still in the learning process, trying to learn as I go. And so I don't say these things definitively, like there's no room for disagreement, but don't be offended if I don't jump into the fray in social media and fight back, or I don't answer, because it's just my nature. okay? And so I can do this and lay the case, but I won't be aggressive. I won't attack you. I'm not calling out names. I'm not fighting against doctrines. I just want to get an idea. Here's the basics of this whole part of our video blog. I really just want to understand Matthew 24. That's the crux of this. What Jesus was saying in that amazing 24th chapter of Matthew, and convinced, and you'll hear me say this probably 100 times, that if you can unlock the secrets of Matthew 24, you can really unlock the secrets of most of the New Testament in regards to end time events. And so while it may not solve all of our issues, it will certainly get us down the road a little ways, and that's what we're going for. So, here's our basic starting point for today. Matthew 24 concerns the destruction of Jerusalem, and it concerns the destruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem in an event that, according to Matthew 24, would happen within a generation. Okay? We'll figure out when that was and how that happened as we go. But just the basics is Matthew 24 deals with the fall of Jerusalem and its temple. Both of those things are very obvious in the chapter. And then it even gives a timeline as to when it will happen. So let's walk our way up to it. To do this, I want to go, and if you're a Bible reader and you like to study along, you like to turn, then grab your Bible and go to Matthew 21. And here's the framework getting us to Matthew 24. The 21st chapter of Matthew marks the beginning of the end. This is the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. This great Olivet discourse. He comes in to great fanfare. And as he is entering, we get some parallel passages between the book of Matthew and the 11th chapter of the book of Mark, in which on his way in, Jesus sees a fig tree. The fig tree's not producing fig. He goes over to eat off of it, but it has no figs. He curses the fig tree, and then he goes into the temple. Mark gives it as a sandwich. Fig tree, temple, fig tree. Matthew 21 drops the first fig tree. I like Mark's way of doing it because he's showing you that Jesus curses that which should have had fruit, goes into the temple and angrily clears the temple of the thieves, saying, "You make my Father's house," which is supposed to be a house of prayer, into a den of thieves. He walks out of the temple. He sees the same fig tree. He reminds the disciples what happened yesterday, and you get the progression, what Jesus is trying to do. It's an illustrated sermon. That which looks like it should produce doesn't produce, so it's cursed. Goes into the temple. That which looks like it should produce isn't producing, thus it is cursed. And he goes back to the fig tree and completes the analogy. And so that's the lead-in in the 21st chapter of the book of Matthew. So you already have Jesus sort of on edge. And I don't think it's just because he's going to the cross, but because he's making a statement against the inefficiency of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And then the tipping point comes for Jesus. When the authorities come to Jesus in Matthew 21 and 23, he comes into the temple. The chief priests, the elders of the people confront him. Remember, they're confronting him because yesterday he cleared the temple out in anger. And they confront him as he was teaching and say, "By what authority do you do these things, and who gave you this authority?" And of course Jesus, I'm not going to read every verse here, of course Jesus responds that if you can tell me how John did things, I'll tell you how I do things. And they won't, so Jesus doesn't. And it leads him to the parable of two sons, verse 28. "What do you think? A man had two sons. He came to the first and he said, 'Son, go work today in my vineyard.' He answered and said, 'I will not.' But afterward he regretted it, and he went. Then he came to the second, and he said likewise. And he answered, 'I will go, sir,' but he did not go. Which of the two did the will of the Father?" And they said to him, "The first." And Jesus said to them, "Assuredly, I say to you, tax collectors and harlots will enter the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. The tax collectors and harlots believed him. And when you saw it, you did not afterward relent and believe him." Simple illustration. A guy goes to two servants. He says to the one servant, "I want you to go do this." And the servant says, "I don't want to go do it." But later has a change of heart and goes. He goes to the second servant and he says, "I want you to go do this." And the guy says, "Okay, good, I'll do it." And then never does it. And Jesus says, which one did the will of the master? And of course it's the guy who initially rejected but then relented and accepted over the guy who had all the verbiage of obedience and then did nothing. And so Jesus is aiming his message at the same inefficient temple dwellers that he cleared yesterday by saying to them, there's two kinds of people in the world. There's the person that hears the good news and they reject the good news, but later the good news gets inside of them and then they allow that to flourish. He equates that with tax collectors and harlots. It's your basic street sinner. He goes, man, sinners are hearing this good news, and yeah, at first they don't all accept it, but then they come around and they've lived lives of rejection, and then boom, they receive. He said, you on the other hand are servants who say, we'll do whatever God tells us to do. We'll do everything that's asked of us. He said, and then when the rubber meets the road, you're not there. That is the lead-in for the next story, which to me is the definitive Matthew parable to help explain Matthew 24. It's Matthew chapter 21, verse 33. I call it the parable of the husbandman. Hear another parable. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it. He dug a wine press in it and he built a tower. And he leased it to vine dressers and went into a far country. Now when vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers, that they might receive its fruit. And the vine dressers took his servants. They beat one, they killed one, and they stoned another. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did likewise to them. Then last of all, he sent his son to them and said, they will respect my son. But when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him and seize his inheritance. So they took him and they cast him out of the vineyard, and they killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers? Now listen to their answer. They say to him, he will destroy those wicked men miserably, and he will lease his vineyard to other vine dressers who will render to him the fruits in their seasons. And Jesus says to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. Now, what just happened is Jesus tells a story to the Pharisees, the same Pharisees that were part of that empty temple, scribes and Pharisees, and he says to them, the vine dresser goes away, the husbandman goes away, and then when he sends his servants to get his crops, they kill him. So he sends more and they kill him. So he sends his son, and what do you think they do to him? They kill the son. And he says, what do you think that the husbandman will do when he gets back? And they answer correctly. Well, I think he'll take vengeance on them. He'll hurt them. And Jesus then says, the stone that the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. Let me ask you, who is the stone that the builders rejected? Well, the New Testament, later Paul will tell us, that's Jesus. Hebrews will tell us as well. That's Jesus, the stone which the builders rejected. So in the story of the husbandman, which one is Jesus? He's the last one, the son. And he's giving a direct prophecy to his audience that says, you're going to kill the son, and the father is going to come and do something about it. Now that's the lead-in story. A few chapters later, after long debate and discussion with the scribes, the disciples say to Jesus, when's this stuff going to happen? And that's Matthew 24. And so it's very important to note that the vengeance that Luke 21 talks about, the day of vengeance, is directed at a people who killed the son rather than accepted the son, even though at first they said, we'll do whatever God tells us to do, but then when given the opportunity, they don't do it. That's the Matthew 21 lead-in. It leads me to answer one question that came in this last week, and that is, when you say finished work eschatology, what do you mean by finished work? I love that question, and I think it has a bunch of answers. I think, first of all, the death of Jesus was finished. That's primary, that's physical. He's hanging on the cross. We base it, by the way, on the phrase, it is finished, the three words Jesus uses at Calvary just before he dies. So his death is finished, but there's way more than that. I think the efficiency of the old Adam, the fight between the old man, the battle of the old man is over. Sin's dominion over mankind is finished. The war against the enemy is finished. He's going to be cast out of the heavens. All of that is finished, but I think most importantly, God's obligation under the old covenant is finished when Jesus says it is finished. Because in Zechariah, God prophesies through the prophet Zechariah, I'll offer my people the chance to pay me my wages, and if they do, I'll break my covenant with them. And Zechariah says, and they paid him 30 pieces of silver. When Judas sells Jesus to the Pharisees, he's given 30 pieces of silver by a group of men that know their Bible. They know the Torah. They know the writings of the prophets. And they know that by buying Judas for 30 pieces of silver, they were paying the blood money of by God out of the covenant. So at Calvary, he finishes it. What he does not finish, he does not finish at the cross the day of vengeance. Because the fact that the son is killed, according to Matthew 21, is going to make the husbandman very angry. So God's vengeance is not completed at Calvary. It's completed when he finishes fulfilling Matthew 24. Now remember this statement from Matthew 21:43. I'm going to take the kingdom away from you, and I'm going to give it to a nation bearing the fruits thereof. Let me give you an Old Testament prophecy of the very same thing. Isaiah chapter 65, verse 15. You shall leave your name as a curse to my chosen, for the Lord God will slay you and call his servants by another name. There's a direct prophecy to Israel. You're going to mess up my chosen one, and I'm going to call you somebody else your name. I'm going to make someone else my servant. Jesus comes along and fulfills or tells us that that's about to happen. Now, where is that fulfilled? Do we see the New Testament calling someone else his servant? We do. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse number 9. You know this verse. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. You who once were not a people, but you are now the people of God, who have not obtained mercy, but now you have obtained mercy. He's talking about those who will accept the Son versus those who reject the Son. What happens to those who accept the Son? They're the chosen generation. They're the royal priesthood. They're the holy nation. They're God's special people. It's why I say Israel is not God's special people. Those who've received the Son are God's special people. You are the holy nation. You've been transferred out of the dominion of one kingdom and into the dominion of another kingdom. And Jesus said it was going to happen. He prophesied the end of one system and the vengeance of God against that system due to one thing. Not sin, but the rejection of the Son. See, sin was dealt with at Calvary, but the rejection of the Son is the main theme of the New Testament. And all that was left then was the fall of the system, the temple to come down, Jerusalem to come down. Now, all of that's well and good. I think it's worth you re-examining. I'm gonna stop here in just a couple of minutes. The next time we're together, and hopefully I'll be a little faster getting another video blog to you. The next time that we're together, we're going to lead into the 24th chapter by hitting the very tail end of the 23rd chapter, where Jesus has given a bunch of woes to the scribes and Pharisees. And there's a couple really big ones there, including the famous "Your house has left you desolate" speech that Jesus gives. It leads into the 24th chapter and leads into the whole reasoning for the questioning. So I've answered at least one question that came in last week. A bunch of others are going to have to be pushed off till the future. There were some that were just not going to be able to answer. They were maybe too often left field or just too far away from where we wanted to be. Again, not an end all, but what I think it's worth concentrating on, go reread the 21st chapter of Matthew, particularly the 33rd through the 43rd verses of the parable of the husbandman, and just take a look at what Jesus means and what the rejection of the Son was going to mean to those who were supposed to be in charge of the vineyard. When was that fulfilled? The difference between a dispensational eschatology, and a lot of people want to call this preterism or partial preterism. I don't care about. I think it just ticks people off when you give titles. But the difference between the way I was raised in this, way I was raised is God's going to come and judge Israel for what they did to Jesus. And it pushed off at least 2,000 years I mean, you got one generation that did this to Jesus and they get by. And then thousands of years later, here's the idea that they need to be punished. Some of the, I don't want to get too political, but there's a real good chance that there was a lot of bad eschatology involved in allowing to happen to the Jewish people in Europe in the early 20th century what happened to the Jewish people, because there was a lot of Christian theology that said, hey, God's judging Israel. If we had understood our eschatology a little bit better, we wouldn't have made those statements, and hopefully not very many people did. But a misunderstanding of what's happening in Matthew 21, 23, 24 is really going to have ramifications for us today. It's going to have ramifications for us politically. It's going to have ramifications in the decisions we make. And I think a return to just simply understanding what Jesus was saying will go a long, long way. I want to thank you for watching my video blog this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see where the Lord leads us in it in the next few weeks. Until then, enjoy the goodness of God and enjoy spreading the good news. I'll see you guys later. Thanks.